All right, in this lesson, we're going to start incorporating the toms into our grooves, and we're going to add 16th notes to our fills. In continuing with some of our basic rock grooves, I want to play this groove that has the bass drum on beats 1 and then the and of 2, and now the snare drum is on beat 2 and then 4 and the and of 4. We're going to play it on the ride cymbal for now, and then eventually we're going to move to the tom. Here's what it sounds like. Play it with me. 1, 2, ready, go. Now let's take that same groove and we're going to move the 4 and up to the rack tom. Ride cymbal, backbeat, bass drum stays the same. 1, 2, ready, go. You hear this kind of a sound in a lot of 50s and 60s music. Where this originated is from the conga drum pattern with that open tone on 4 and the and of 4. So it's a nice thing to transfer over to the drum set. Let's try it a little faster with the same pattern. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. So when I'm playing on the ride cymbal, this is nice and easy to reach up to the tom with my left hand because my hands are open. Now, if I want to play this same groove on the hi-hat, it's a little more difficult because I have to navigate getting up here without getting in the way of this stick. You might find that when you're playing the hi-hat and trying to reach up to the tom, you have to adjust a little bit to get your hand out of the way. Just make sure to try to keep the sound as consistent as you can when you're going from this position to this position. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Another sound that you hear fairly often with this type of a groove is a cross-stick sound on the snare drum instead of a regular backbeat sound. That sounds like this. 2, 1, 2, ready, go. We talked about getting a good cross-stick sound and how you want to find the sweet spot on the snare drum. The more you practice that, the more comfortable you get with being able to land right on that spot or kind of pull it out of nowhere every single time. So that's the kind of thing you need to do when you're alternating with the tom. You need to land right in the right spot to get that cross-stick sound. So it's something that you definitely need to practice to be able to get a consistently good sound with the cross-stick. Let's try another variation on this idea. One of the tricky parts about this is you're going to play the snare drum on 2 and 4, but the and of 4 is on the tom. So you have to play 4 and. It's a pretty quick movement up to that tom. So that's something that you're going to want to work on. You can try to sort of do a rebound stroke and bounce off the snare drum and bring it right up to the tom. Here's what it sounds like. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Here's another groove you hear fairly often, and instead of just one tom, we're going to add in 2 toms. You can hear this in all kinds of popular music. You'll probably recognize it when you hear it. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, ready, go. This is a great groove because it has some syncopation and you're moving around the kit using the textures and sounds of the toms. It's a nice groove that sounds complex, but it's not that hard to do. Let's slow it down and let's play it together. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. You might notice in a groove like this that you're having to adjust your ride cymbal hand a little bit to be able to get to the floor tom. That's okay, but if you have to make an adjustment like that, make sure you don't change the sound of the cymbal. Don't move out to the edge or up closer to the bell or anything like that. If you're having to move, you can move a little bit without really changing the playing area on the cymbal, but most importantly, you don't want to change the sound or the feel or the consistency of that ride pattern. It's the same thing when you're playing over here on the hi-hat and you're going to the tom. You might have to adjust a little bit, lift up, do something like that, but you don't want to completely change the sound, and most importantly, you don't want to play out of time. Sometimes when you're playing a groove, you want to add a little weight or a little depth to a backbeat, and an easy way to do that is just to break away from the cymbal for one beat or 1/8 note and add a tom note. So check out this groove. I'm playing 1/8 notes on the ride cymbal, and then I just move to the floor tom for beat 4 to give a little bit more emphasis to that beat, and then I'm right back up on the cymbal. Let's play that together. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. You might notice in this groove that getting to the floor tom and back happens pretty quickly. It's easiest to do that if you just use a little flick of the wrist. Now you're going to find in a lot of different grooves and fill situations that motion happens a lot where you just quickly jump out to one spot. So you want to stay loose, you want to be able to move in this direction as well as this direction. If you want to put even more emphasis on your beat 4 in a groove like this, you can play a big quarter note and not come back to the ride cymbal on the and of 4. That sounds like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Another way you can fatten up one note is by playing it as a flam, just like we did on the snare drum. But in this case, the hands are split. So you're playing a flam between the snare drum and the floor tom. It sounds like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Another way to get a big sound on a single beat is to move the grace note to the high tom. It sounds like this. In the context of the groove, it sounds like this. 2, 1, 2, ready, go. point of all this is to be able to vary your grooves in a lot of different ways that will change the sound and change the feel without having to change too much about them. So adding a simple flam or adding another texture from a tom to something that you already know how to do is much easier than trying to come up with something totally new, a totally different groove. And sometimes that little change is exactly what is needed to make the music feel just right. One of the most common examples of using the toms in grooves is to bring the right hand onto the floor tom and play that ride pattern on the tom. This is a heavier sounding groove. You've heard it many times before. In this example, I'm going to play eighth notes on the floor tom, 4 on the floor, and just the backbeat on the snare drum, 2 and 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. One way you can make this sound even bigger and more aggressive is you can flip your sticks around and play on the butt end, and you can open up your hands a little bit on the backbeat and play a little bit of a flam. That sounds like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. On a very heavy groove like this, the grace note of the flam is not really a grace note because I'm playing pretty big on the floor tom, but the spacing of those notes is still the same spacing that I would get from a flam. So the right hand is still playing a little bit before the left hand. Although this is a great heavy sound on the toms, playing the butt end of the stick is not really an optimal sound on the ride cymbal. So if you're playing something where you have to get to the ride cymbal right away, you're probably going to have to practice flipping that stick around to get to the tip. We're going to play one more groove on the toms. In this one, we're going to move up to the rack tom for 4 and. No flams in the hands on this one, but you might notice too, to get that bigger, more aggressive, heavier sound on the bass drum, I'm playing with my heel up, and I'm also going to add the hi-hat on those quarter notes with my heel up over there. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. One thing I want to warn you about is when you're flipping your sticks around and you're playing really heavy on the toms, if you're not playing with some rebound, if you're playing too heavily into the drums, you are going to dent your drum heads and you might even break them. So be careful. There's a fine line between getting a big full sound and playing too hard that you're going to actually damage your equipment. These are just a handful of tom grooves. I want to encourage you to check out a bunch of music, try to find some songs that have tom grooves and see if you can hear exactly what it is they're doing. And also spend some time messing around on your own. Change one little element at a time. Add a note on the bass drum, add another note on the tom, whatever it happens to be, and try to come up with some of your own grooves. Don't just read what's on the page, because there are many other examples of awesome tom grooves that you can find or that you can create on your own. Next, we're going to introduce a new note value, the 16th note. The quarter note has a stem, the 8th note has a stem and a flag, and now the 16th note has a stem and 2 flags. We call it a 16th note because there are 16 of them in a measure of 4/4 time. The 16th note is twice as fast as the 8th note, and when it's grouped together, like 4 in a row, there are 2 beams, whereas 2 eighth notes only have 1 beam. Now that we're adding 16th notes to the bar, there are many, many combinations of 16th and 8th notes that we can put together. We're not going to do that many of those right now. We'll get into many of those as we go, but for right now, we're just going to talk about putting 4 16th notes together in one beat. Remember, 8th notes divide a beat into 2 parts, 1 and. Now 16th notes divide the beat into 4 parts, so that's twice as fast as the 8th notes, so we count that 1 E and A. I'm going to add a quarter note onto beat 2 in this example. As you can see, count 1 has 4 16th notes and 2 has just 1 quarter note. The way we count that is 1 E and a 2. 1 E and a 2. Do that with me. Ready? Go. 1 E and a 2. 1 E and a 2. If we put that rhythm on the staff in 4/4 time, you'll notice that I have 4 16th notes on beat 1, a quarter note on 2, then 4 16th notes again on beat 3, and a quarter note on beat 4. Now the way we would count that is 1 E and a 2, 3 E and a 4. 1 E and a 2, 3 E and a 4. Now let's play that same thing a little faster, again with the bass drum on quarter notes. 1, 2, ready, go. Let's take half of that measure and use it as a drum fill. So what we're going to do is play a groove for a full measure, then for 2 beats of the next measure, and then plug that fill in on 3 E and a 4. 1, 2, ready, go. Now that's a cool fill and everything, but it kind of stops right on beat 4. So a good way to sort of lead into the downbeat a little bit more is to play something like 2 eighth notes on 4. So 3 E and a 4 and 1. Let's try that. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Now let's plug that exact same fill in, but on beat 4, we're going to play our 2 eighth notes on the rack tom. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Now we're going to split the 16th notes up between the snare drum and the rack tom, and then we're going to play our 2 eighth notes on the floor tom. But since we're playing a crash at the end of this fill, it doesn't really make sense to play right, left, and then reach all the way over and crash. So let's make those eighth notes right, right, and then we'll crash with our left hand. Let's try that slowly. So 1, 2, because you're playing 2 rights on the floor tom, you should have plenty of time to get over with the left hand. Let's try it one more time, slowly. 1, 2. Since this is the first time we've incorporated a left-handed crash, you might want to take some time to just practice that stroke and make sure that you're playing the glancing blow, the sort of backwards J shape, to get off of that cymbal, that you're not playing into it and you're getting a big open sound out of the cymbal. One other aspect of crashing with the left hand is getting back to the snare drum in time to play the backbeat. So in this instance, I would recommend that you play the crash and then bring everything back on beat 2, as opposed to trying to play the crash and get back on the end of 1. Just bring the hands back together on beat 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you might want to just practice that a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll find that there are a lot of different motions involved with playing the drums and moving from one instrument to the other. Just stay relaxed and stay fluid with your motion. Now let's take that fill, 2 notes on the snare drum, 2 notes on the tom, 2 eighth notes on the floor tom with the right hand, left-handed crash, and then back to the groove. Let's do it all in the context of the groove. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready. Next, we're going to play that same rhythm, but we're going to change the sticking. So the 16th note now is going to be a right-handed paradiddle, and then the 8th notes will be left hand on the high tom, right hand on the floor tom. So paradiddle on the snare drum, tom, tom, left-handed crash. Let's try it slowly. 1, 2, again. 1, 2. Before we put that in the context of the groove, practice it a few times. Get comfortable with the sticking. You might want to just play that sticking on the snare drum a few times. Right, left, right, right, left, right, left. Right, left, right, right, left, right, left. Speed it up, play it a little slower, and then move it around the toms, ending with the crash. And once you feel real comfortable with that, then you can put it in the context. Now let's play that same fill using the paradiddle sticking, left-handed crash, with the same groove we've been doing. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. A rhythmic pattern is really just a framework to use to come up with your own stickings and your own variations on fills. I'm going to play a little bit and I'm going to improvise different stickings using that same da-da-da-da-da-da rhythm as my fill. So I'll play the groove a little faster for a measure and a half, and then I'll play that 2-beat fill using multiple different stickings. 1, 2, ready, go. I just made each one of those fills up. We didn't plan it, they weren't written down, nothing like that. I just have enough experience that I can think of an idea in real time while I'm playing and execute it. Now, that's a skill that you definitely want to develop. So if all you're doing is reading your fills out of a book every time, or somebody's telling you exactly what to play, you're never going to flex that muscle of being able to improvise in the moment. So spend some time creating your own rhythms, your own patterns, your own stickings to come up with fills, and then just pay attention to what that sounds like, how does it end, what hand are you landing on, things like that, and you'll start to develop some of your own language and your own fills. I realize this is a lot of information. We're playing grooves on the toms, we're playing grooves on the cymbals and incorporating the toms, We added 16th notes, and we're talking about different stickings and all this stuff. So take some time and sit with this material. Come up with some of your own stickings in these fills, come up with some of your own grooves, and be creative with it and have fun. In our next lesson, we're going to work on opening the hi-hat.